Halloween, a night of costumes, candy, and carefully crafted scares. But for some, the horror isn't make-believe. From gruesome pranks gone wrong to fatal costume mishaps and eerie accidents that seem ripped straight from a horror film, these stories remind us how quickly celebration can turn into catastrophe. Here are 5 of the most horrifying Halloween deaths ever. They'll make you think twice before stepping out into the night.
Latest, however, on the tragedy in South Korea. More than 150 people were killed during a Halloween celebration crushed to death in a narrow alleyway.
It was supposed to be a night of celebration, the first Halloween in Seoul since the end of strict COVID restrictions. Tens of thousands of young people dressed in colorful costumes packed into the sloping back streets near the Hamilton Hotel. For many, it was a long-awaited return to freedom. But what began as a joyful night of laughter and selfies soon spiraled into one of the darkest nights in South Korea's history. By 10 p.m. on October 29, 2022, the atmosphere had changed. The crowd was no longer moving. People were trapped shoulder to shoulder, unable to lift their arms or even turn their heads. Those in the middle began to panic. A sudden surge rippled through the mass of bodies, pushing hundreds down the narrow, slanted alley. People fell, one after another, like dominoes. Within seconds, laughter turned to screams. The music from nearby clubs kept blaring, muffling the chaos outside. But inside the crush, it was pure silence, the kind that comes when you can no longer breathe. Witnesses later said the crowd was so dense that it felt like being caught in an ocean current. No control, no escape. Some tried to climb the walls, others begged for help. Phones lit up the alley as desperate text messages went unanswered. Those who were pinned couldn't even raise their hands to call for rescue. For many, the air simply ran out. When emergency calls started flooding in around 10:15 p.m., it was already too late for many. Ambulances struggled to reach the scene. The streets were jammed, and the crowd was still too thick to navigate. Those who escaped began pulling bodies from the pile, performing CPR on the ground, still dressed in Halloween costumes. Photos and videos later showed rows of victims laid out under blankets on the pavement, while flashing lights reflected off fake blood and glitter. By the end of the night, 159 people were gone. Most were in their teens and 20s. The nation woke up to scenes that looked like something out of a nightmare. The next morning, Seoul fell silent. Flags were lowered to half-mast. President Yoon Suk-yeol declared a national period of mourning, calling it an unimaginable tragedy. But grief quickly turned to anger. Investigations revealed what many feared. This disaster could have been prevented. Police had received at least 11 emergency calls hours before the crush began, warnings that the streets were dangerously overcrowded. Yet no one intervened. Only 137 officers were assigned to Itaewon that night, compared to over 6,000 sent to monitor a protest elsewhere in the city. No barriers, no traffic control, no crowd management. Just a sea of people with nowhere to go. Experts would later say that the disaster was predictable. The narrow, sloping alley, only 3 meters wide, had long been a bottleneck during festivals. The incline forced people downward, trapping those at the bottom beneath tons of human weight. And when panic spread, it turned fatal. A single push was all it took to set off a chain reaction that crushed dozens in seconds. The government's handling of the aftermath only deepened public outrage. President Yoon initially accepted responsibility, promising reform, but later deflected blame, igniting protests across Seoul. Families of the victims demanded answers. Many carried photos of their children's young faces smiling in Halloween makeup to rallies in the capital. To them, this wasn't just a crowd accident. It was a failure of leadership, of preparedness, of compassion. In the weeks that followed, Itaewon became a memorial. The once bustling nightlife district was transformed into a sea of flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Messages from around the world poured in, expressing sorrow and disbelief. One note read, "You went out to celebrate life, not to lose it."
Partygoers captured some of the frantic moments after the gunshots rang out.
Oh, I got blood on me too.
All right.
Oh my God, I told you somebody right next to me got shot.
It was Halloween night 2019 in Orinda, California. It was supposed to be the perfect Halloween party. but within hours it would become one of the Bay Area's deadliest nights. The 4,000-square-foot home sat on an upscale street, rented by a woman who told the owners she was hosting a family reunion for guests avoiding wildfire smoke. The owners agreed, on one condition: no parties. But by 10 p.m., more than 100 people had packed inside. The family gathering was actually an Airbnb mansion party, secretly advertised on social media. Neighbors complained about the noise. Cars lined the street. The bass shook the windows. And somewhere, a doorbell camera recorded it all. The homeowner, watching remotely, realized the truth and called the police. 2 noise complaints came in before officers could arrive. Orinda's small police force was already tied up on another call in Oakland. By the time help came, it was too late. At 10:50 p.m., chaos exploded. No one remembers the first sound. Maybe a scream, maybe the sharp crack of gunfire. Within seconds, music turned to panic. Partygoers ran for their lives, leaping off balconies, hiding in bushes, crying out for help. When police finally arrived, the scene was unrecognizable. People were bleeding in the street. 3 were dead on the floor. 2 more would die later at the hospital. 5 young lives gone in an instant. Among them was 19-year-old Oceana Tompkins, who dreamed of opening a youth center to give local kids a safe place to go. As dawn broke, investigators combed through the wreckage. The sheriff called it what it was: a bloodbath. Dozens of cell phones, shell casings, and 2 guns were recovered. Witnesses said the violence began in the kitchen. Others whispered it was gang retaliation. Several victims were tied to a San Francisco street group known as the Page Street Mob. Police soon suspected the shooting wasn't random. It was deliberate. Videos from the night revealed armed guests slipping guns past the front door guard. There was no warning, no argument, just laughter one moment, then murder the next. 2 weeks later, 5 men were arrested for murder and conspiracy. But within days, prosecutors released them all. Not enough evidence, no charges. To this day, no one has been held responsible for what became known as the Orinda Halloween Massacre. In the days that followed, the quiet suburb turned into a mourning ground. Outside the mansion, candles and flowers lined the walkway. Signs read, "Your lives matter." Downtown, a memorial fountain overflowed with photos of the victims, all young, all gone too soon. Outrage swept through social media. Many accused Airbnb and city officials of caring more about damage control than about justice. Others pointed out the painful truth. All the victims were people of color, yet their deaths received little national attention. 2 days later, Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky announced a sweeping policy change: a nationwide ban on party houses, tighter screening for high-risk bookings, and a new rapid response team. But to the families, it was too late. Their children weren't coming home.
Staff Sergeant Ryan Masseth, an elite Green Beret soldier, died in Iraq last January.
Air Vice Marshal Abed Hamid Mohoush, one of the most powerful men in Saddam Hussein's Air Force. A decorated pilot, a veteran of the Iran, Iraq, and Gulf Wars, a man who had spent decades commanding the skies. But by late 2003, his world had collapsed. Saddam's regime was gone, Baghdad had fallen, and U.S. forces now controlled Iraq. In early November that year, the Americans came for his family. His sons were taken during raids, dragged from their home and held at an undisclosed location. So, like a father desperate to protect what little he had left, Mohoush did something no one expected. He surrendered himself. On November 10, 2003, he walked through the gates of a U.S. base in Al-Qaim, near the Syrian border, hoping that his cooperation would bring his sons home. He didn't know that within 16 days, he'd be dead. At first, the official story sounded clean, controlled. The U.S. military said Mohoush had died of natural causes. They told the media he had fallen ill during questioning. Leaflets were dropped across Iraqi villages claiming that the general had cooperated, given up insurgent names, and helped U.S. forces. The message was simple: surrender, and you'll be treated well. But behind those carefully crafted headlines was a very different truth. The truth began to unravel slowly. The Washington Post published what the U.S. military hadn't wanted anyone to see. Mohoush hadn't been captured in a raid he had walked in voluntarily. He hadn't died from illness. He had been tortured to death. For 2 weeks, he had been interrogated by a mix of U.S. military intelligence officers, CIA operatives, and Iraqi mercenaries hired by the agency. When Mohush didn't give them what they wanted, they turned to claustrophobic techniques, a sanitized phrase for what was really happening behind those concrete walls. He was beaten with clubs and rubber hoses. His ribs were broken. His body was battered from head to toe. Then, on November 26, 2003, inside a small dimly lit room known only as Interrogation Room 6, his final session began. A soldier forced him into a sleeping bag, zipped it shut, and sat on his chest. Mohush's ribs cracked further under the weight. He tried to breathe, but the air was gone. Trapped, crushed, gasping, the 56-year-old father, pilot, and patriot suffocated to death on a concrete floor, not on a battlefield, but in a place where he was supposed to be a prisoner of war, protected by law. Hours later, a statement was issued. The detainee complained of feeling sick and lost consciousness. For months, that was the version the world was meant to believe. But the truth had a way of clawing its way out. When the Abu Ghraib scandal broke in 2004, hidden documents surfaced, autopsy reports, witness testimonies, and interrogation logs that told the real story. The cause of death, asphyxia due to smothering and chest compression. The body showed extensive blunt force trauma. By 2005, 4 soldiers were charged. Chief Warrant Officers Louis Welshofer Jr. and Jeff Williams, along with Sergeant First Class William Summer and Specialist Jerry Loper. They had all been there, part of the system that turned interrogation into torture. 2 days before his death, Mohush had already been beaten nearly unconscious by a CIA-sponsored group of Iraqi paramilitaries. They pummeled him with fists, a club, and a rubber hose. He was handed over to Army interrogators barely able to stand. And yet, the next day, they zipped him into that sleeping bag and sat on him until he stopped breathing. At the trial in 2006, Chief Warrant Officer Welshofer faced charges of murder and assault, but the verdict shocked many. Not guilty of murder. Instead, he was convicted only of negligent homicide and dereliction of duty. His punishment? No prison time. Just a $6,000 fine, 2 months of home restriction, and a formal reprimand.
One minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
It was the morning of January 28, 1986. A biting chill clung to the air at Kennedy Space Center as the Space Shuttle Challenger stood poised on Launch Pad 39B, gleaming white against a flawless blue sky. To the thousands gathered below, and the millions watching live on television, it was a moment of hope, pride, and wonder. But to a handful of engineers watching from afar, it was a ticking time bomb. Inside the shuttle sat 7 astronauts, ordinary people made extraordinary by courage. Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, and Ellison Onizuka, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher from New Hampshire. She was to be the first civilian in space, the face of NASA's new Teacher in Space program. For once, space didn't just belong to scientists, it belonged to the classroom, to every kid watching at home. But beneath the excitement, there was unease. The night before, the temperature had plunged to 18 degrees, the coldest weather ever for a shuttle launch. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, were terrified. They warned NASA that the O-ring seal's rubber rings meant to contain searing hot gas inside the boosters might become too brittle to work in such cold. If they failed, those gases could escape and burn straight through the rocket. 2 engineers, Roger Boisjoli and Alan McDonald, pleaded to delay the launch. They argued, shouted, even begged, but NASA managers were under immense political pressure. The launch had already been delayed several times, and the media mocked the agency for hesitating. Executives wanted success, not caution, and in the end, the engineers were overruled. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger's engines ignited. The ground trembled. The shuttle rose majestically into the sky, trailing white fire and hope. McAuliffe's students cheered in classrooms across America. The families waved proudly. For 59 seconds, everything seemed perfect. Then, a small tongue of orange flame appeared on the side of the right booster, invisible to the naked eye, but captured by high-speed cameras. It flickered at first, then grew as hot gases burned through the metal casing and scorched the external fuel tank. The O-ring had failed exactly as the engineers predicted. At 72 seconds into flight, Challenger was 48,000 feet high, moving at nearly twice the speed of sound. The flame sliced through a support strut holding the booster in place. The external tank ruptured, releasing a storm of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, a deadly mix that ignited in an instant. At 11:13 a.m., a white bloom of fire spread across the sky. The crowd gasped, then screamed. Pieces of the shuttle spiraled outward, the boosters tumbling wildly, the orbiter vanishing into the explosion. But the truth came later. The crew wasn't killed instantly. The crew cabin had survived the explosion intact, hurtling through the sky on a doomed arc. Inside, the astronauts were conscious, oxygen systems automatically activated. One of the last recorded transmissions came from pilot Michael Smith, his calm voice breaking the silence with 2 words, "I-O." For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the cabin plummeted toward the Atlantic. Over 12 miles, no control, no parachutes, just gravity and silence. Investigators later determined that at least 3 of the astronauts had manually activated their emergency air packs. That means for part of that fall, they were awake. They knew. The cabin hit the ocean at over 200 miles per hour, 18 miles off the coast of Florida. The impact shattered everything. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but there were no survivors. NASA went silent. America was in shock. Schools turned off their televisions. Reporters struggled for words. That night, President Ronald Reagan addressed the nation. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. For 32 months, NASA grounded the shuttle program. A presidential inquiry, the Rogers Commission, found the cause, the O-ring failure, triggered by cold, ignored warnings, and a culture of silence. The design of the solid rocket boosters was completely overhauled, with new seals and heaters to prevent another catastrophe. When divers recovered the wreckage, they found the crew cabin buried on the ocean floor. The evidence told a story of humans who did everything right and a system that failed them. They found 3 air packs manually switched on, proof of defiance even in death. Challenger was supposed to be a celebration, a symbol that space belonged to everyone. Instead, it became a monument to tragedy and a reminder of what happens when ambition outruns caution. The teacher in space never got to teach her lesson, but the world learned one instead, written in fire across the Florida sky. In the rugged mountains of Zabul Province, Afghanistan, U.S. and Afghan forces had spent the entire day sweeping through the remote Gaza Valley, a place known for its harsh terrain and hidden dangers. They were there to secure the area ahead of Afghanistan's 2014 presidential elections. But as night fell, that mission turned into one of the most tragic and disturbing friendly fire incidents in modern U.S. military history. The team, a mix of U.S. Special Forces, infantry soldiers, and Afghan allies, had been exchanging sporadic fire with Taliban fighters throughout the day. By nightfall, they believed the worst was over. Then, as they began to pull back toward their extraction points, the mountains erupted in gunfire. The Taliban had returned, ambushing from the shadows. In the chaos, an air controller on the ground, exhausted, under pressure, and desperate to protect his team, called for close air support from above. High in the sky, a B-1B Lancer bomber circled, its crew ready to rain down precision fire on the enemy. But what was meant to save them would instead destroy them. The bomber locked onto coordinates sent from the ground. Laser-guided bombs were armed. The air controller confirmed his target, believing he was directing the strike toward enemy positions on a ridge just 300 meters away. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the coordinates were wrong. The soldiers on that ridge weren't the enemy. They were his own brothers in arms. At 8:21 p.m., 2 500-pound JDAM bombs dropped from the B-1B and screamed toward the earth. The explosions shattered the valley, lighting up the dark mountains with a blinding flash. The shock wave rolled across the rocks, and then came the silence, that eerie, heavy kind that only follows something unspeakable. When the first rescuers reached the ridge, the horror hit them like a physical blow. The strike had landed directly on top of the friendly position. 5 U.S. soldiers and 1 Afghan interpreter were gone, lives erased in an instant by their own side. Their gear was shredded, their positions unrecognizable. One soldier, Staff Sergeant Scott Studenmund, was still breathing when they found him. His team's medic, Brandon Branch, worked desperately under the flicker of firelight to save him, wrapping tourniquets, whispering reassurance, but it was too late. The young soldier took his final breath in the arms of a brother who couldn't believe what had just happened. Those killed that night were not ordinary men. They were among America's best. Staff Sergeant Jason McDonald, 28, a decorated Green Beret from Georgia. Specialist Justin Helton, 25, a bomb disposal expert from Ohio. Corporal Justin Klaus, 22, a tough infantryman from Washington. Private First Class Aaron Toppin, just 19, on his first deployment from Illinois, and Afghan soldier Sergeant Gulbuddin Saki, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with them. They had trained for years to fight the enemy, not to die by mistake. When the truth emerged, it stunned everyone from commanders to grieving families back home. The investigation revealed a devastating flaw in the bomber's targeting system. The B-1B's high-tech sniper pod, used to identify ground targets, couldn't detect the infrared strobes on American helmets, the very beacons meant to mark them as friendly. From the sky, the bomber crew couldn't tell who was who. They had relied on those invisible markers, assuming they worked. They didn't, and no one on the ground knew it. The report later called it an avoidable tragedy, but those words did nothing to heal the pain. The air controller had given the wrong coordinates, the commander had trusted flawed information, and the bomber had followed orders without question. Every small mistake, every false assumption lined up perfectly to create a disaster. One wrong signal, one missed detail, and 5 heroes were gone. Captain Derek Anderson, the Special Forces officer leading the operation, was cleared of wrongdoing, but his career ended anyway. The Air Force controller who called in the strike was forced out of special operations. Families demanded answers that never truly came.
Investigators re-examined the bags, and allegedly they found Gerald's hair not only in the bag but on Lisa, and they matched it to him.
It was Halloween night, 1973, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. 9-year-old Lisa Ann French, dressed as a hobo with freckles drawn on her cheeks, a green parka, and a floppy felt hat, set out alone to trick-or-treat. She was supposed to meet a friend, but when that friend was grounded, Lisa decided to go by herself. It was a small town. Everyone knew everyone. What could possibly go wrong? Lisa's route was simple. Stop by a classmate's house, then one of her teachers, and finally head toward a neighborhood Halloween party at Pumpkin Place. She never made it. Somewhere between the familiar streets she'd walked her whole life, she stopped at the home of her neighbor, Gerald Miles Turner Jr., a man she knew, a man her family trusted, a man who smiled when she knocked on his door and said, "Trick or treat." Turner was 25, quiet, polite, and seemingly ordinary. He lived with his girlfriend Arlene and their baby. Neighbors thought he was harmless, but behind that calm exterior was a darkness no one saw coming. When Lisa stepped through his doorway that night, her small bag of candy swinging at her side, Turner closed the door behind her, and the world, as her family knew it, ended. Hours passed. Lisa's mother, Mary Ann, began pacing the house. It was nearly 7 p.m., and there was no sign of her. By 10 p.m., panic spread. Police and volunteers flooded the streets with flashlights and flyers. Neighbors left porch lights on through the night. Over the next 4 days, more than 5,000 people joined the search. Soldiers, Girl Scouts, families, all combing through the woods and fields surrounding Fond du Lac, praying for a miracle. But the miracle never came. On November 3rd, a farmer driving home in nearby Techida noticed 2 brown plastic bags discarded in a ditch behind a barbed wire fence. Inside, one was Lisa's little body. Inside the other, her Halloween costume. The medical examiner later confirmed what her mother already feared. Lisa had been sexually assaulted and suffocated. Her life had ended on the very night meant to celebrate childhood joy. The community was shattered. Halloween decorations were torn down. Parents refused to let their children out of their sight. A once peaceful Wisconsin town now lived in fear that a monster was walking among them, and he was, right next door. For 9 months, police quietly investigated Turner. He acted normal, calm. They questioned him repeatedly, even gave him a lie detector test. It came back inconclusive, but the evidence began to build. Fibers from Turner's bedsheets were found on Lisa's clothes and body hair matched his. Finally, in August 1974, Turner broke. He confessed. He told investigators that Lisa had knocked on his door and smiled when she saw him, that she had trusted him, that he had been sexually motivated. His confession was chilling. He admitted to attacking her, realizing afterward she wasn't breathing, then panicking when his girlfriend came home. While she was in another room, Turner hid Lisa's body in a bag, later driving to a farm field to dump her remains. To avoid leaving fingerprints, he wore socks on his hands. When his girlfriend returned, he claimed to be sick. In truth, he was already the Halloween killer. The trial began the following year, and Turner was sentenced to 38 years and 6 months in prison. But the horror didn't end there. After serving just 17 years, he was paroled in 1992 for good behavior. The news sparked outrage across Wisconsin. Lisa's family was devastated. Crowds protested in the streets, furious that the man who destroyed a child's life could walk free again. Their anger forced the government to act. Lawmakers passed a new regulation known as Turner's Law, allowing violent sexual offenders to be kept in mental health facilities even after their prison sentences ended if they were deemed too dangerous to release. Turner's freedom didn't last long. In 1993, he was sent back to prison after officials realized his parole had been miscalculated. Years later, he was released again only to violate his parole in 2003 after authorities found a disturbing collection of pornographic material in his home. He was sentenced to another 15 years. In prison, Turner wrote a haunting letter addressed to Lisa, a confession that read like a twisted apology. "I can still see you standing in the doorway with that felt hat, beaming at having recognized me. Then I see the delight in your eyes turn to fear as I close the door behind you. On that night, I became a monster." In 2022, a judge finally ruled that Turner would never be released. He remains confined to a high-security mental health facility, condemned to spend the rest of his life under watch.
We begin tonight with another alleged case of death by hazing, but this one is different. It didn't happen at a school, but in the United States Army, in the middle of a war zone.
He was just 19 young, hopeful, and full of quiet pride. Danny Chen had grown up in the heart of Manhattan's Chinatown, the only child of hardworking immigrants from southern China. His father was a chef, his mother a seamstress. They had come to America chasing the same dream so many before them had, and for a while, it seemed like that dream was within reach. Danny had graduated from Pace University High School, earned a full scholarship to Baruch College, and had his whole life ahead of him. But instead of taking that path, he chose another one of honor, service, and sacrifice. In January 2011, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to serve the country that had given his family a new beginning. But what awaited him in uniform wasn't brotherhood, it was torment. After training at Fort Benning, Georgia, Danny was assigned to C Company, 3rd Battalion, 21st Infantry Regiment. By August, he was deployed to a dusty outpost in Kandahar, Afghanistan. He was the only Chinese-American soldier in his unit, and that difference would soon make him a target. It began with words, cruel words. They called him names. They mocked the shape of his eyes, his accent, his heritage. When he made mistakes, they didn't correct him. They humiliated him. When he was tired, they worked him harder. And when he fell behind, they made him crawl through gravel until his skin tore open. Sometimes they threw rocks at him. Other times, they dragged him across the ground like a rag doll. Every day, the bullying escalated. He was supposed to be serving alongside brothers. Instead, he was surrounded by tormentors wearing the same uniform. One night, a sergeant dragged him out of bed and pulled him over 15 meters of gravel for forgetting to turn off a water heater. The incident left his back bruised and bleeding. His superiors saw it. They heard the racial slurs. They saw his pain, but no one stopped it. No one intervened. The abuse continued, 6 long weeks of cruelty that broke him piece by piece. He confided in one of his fellow soldiers that he couldn't take it anymore. "They treat me like a dog," he said. "Sometimes I just want to end it." And on October 3rd, 2011, that's exactly what he did. Inside his living quarters at the base in Kandahar, Private Danny Chen took his own life with his rifle. When they found him, it was too late. The boy, who had joined the army to serve his country, was gone not by enemy fire, but by the brutality of his own unit. When word reached his parents in New York, they were shattered. The Army's first explanation was vague, distant, almost cold. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No details, no answers, just silence. But as the truth began to unfold, it became something far darker than anyone had imagined. Investigators uncovered months of abuse, a pattern of racial taunting, physical punishment, and hazing that drove Danny to the breaking point. Soldiers admitted to forcing him to crawl on rocks while they threw stones at him, calling him slurs as he bled. On the very day he died, they had made him crawl over 100 meters of gravel while carrying heavy gear, mocking him every step of the way. The Army eventually charged 8 soldiers, superiors and peers alike. Their names became public, their crimes laid bare: assault, maltreatment, dereliction of duty, and negligence. The trials dragged on for months, revealing a toxic environment where racism and cruelty festered unchecked. Some received short jail terms, 30 days here, 6 months there. Others were demoted or discharged, but none of it felt like justice. On October 13th, 2011, under a gray New York sky, Danny was laid to rest in Valhalla Cemetery with full military honors.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Peter Jennings at ABC News headquarters. In the words of a flight director at NASA, it has been a bad day. 7 astronauts have died, their families shattered. The space program has been dealt a terrible blow. The larger family of men and women in space exploration devastated.
On January 16th, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center for a 16-day science mission called STS-107. The crew of 7 astronauts included Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, mission specialists Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, and Israeli payload specialist Ilan Ramon. Their mission focused on conducting over 80 experiments in various scientific fields. During launch, a large piece of foam insulation broke off from the external fuel tank and struck Columbia's left wing. This happened just 81 seconds after liftoff, when the shuttle was traveling at over 1,500 mmHg. The impact created a small hole in the wing's thermal protection system, a damage that would prove fatal during re-entry. Engineers noticed the foam strike, but believed it was not a serious problem since similar incidents had happened before without causing disasters. NASA engineers requested high-resolution images from military satellites to inspect the wing, but mission managers denied the request. They reasoned that even if there was damage, nothing could be done to fix it while in orbit. The crew, unaware of the danger, carried out their experiments and maintained cheerful communication with mission control throughout the mission. On February 1st, 2003, Columbia began its return to Earth. As it entered the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean, hot plasma entered through the hole in the left wing. Temperatures rose above 2,500 degrees, melting the aluminum structure inside. The sensors on the left wing began failing rapidly. At 8:59 a.m. EST, while the shuttle was 200,000 feet above Texas, Columbia's left wing tore away from the fuselage. Within seconds, the shuttle disintegrated, scattering debris across Texas and Louisiana. All 7 astronauts lost their lives instantly. The tragedy shocked the world. It was the second major disaster in the history of the NASA's Space Shuttle program, after the Challenger explosion in 1986. NASA suspended all shuttle flights for over 2 years to investigate and improve safety. Investigators found that the foam strike had been underestimated, and communication failures between engineers and management played a major role in the tragedy. In response, NASA made major changes to shuttle operations. Future missions included detailed inspections of the shuttle's heat shield while in orbit and procedures for on-orbit repairs. NASA also developed rescue plans for crews in case of serious damage. When flights resumed in 2005, new safety rules required that all missions go to the International Space Station so that astronauts could seek refuge if needed. The Columbia disaster marked the beginning of the end for the shuttle era, leading to the retirement of the fleet in 2011. The bravery of the STS-107 crew and the lessons learned from their loss continue to influence space safety and engineering standards today.
At the height of the Cold War, two superpowers would vie to put their man on the moon. Yet before one small step for man, one giant leap in spaceflight would have to come first.
It was April 22, 1967. The pale dawn light spread across the Baikonur Cosmodrome as Vladimir Komarov, husband, father, and national hero, walked slowly toward the launch pad of Soyuz 1. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. He knew this might be his last walk. Behind the proud smiles and patriotic speeches, he carried a terrible secret. The spacecraft he was about to pilot was fatally flawed. Komarov, 40 years old, was already a Soviet icon, a test pilot and cosmonaut who had flown on Voskhod 1, the first mission to carry more than one human into space. But this flight was different. He wasn't chasing glory. He was walking into a machine he knew could kill him. His closest friend, Yuri Gagarin, had begged the Kremlin to cancel the launch. Engineers had found over 200 major defects: faulty parachutes, unstable controls, unreliable sensors, and a heat shield that might rip off during re-entry. The warnings were ignored. The launch was politically timed for Lenin's birthday and May Day celebrations. Komarov faced an impossible choice. If he refused, Gagarin, his backup, would have to fly. He couldn't let his friend die in a doomed spacecraft, so he accepted the mission in silence, smiling for cameras as he stepped into Soyuz 1, knowing it was a coffin. At 3:35 a.m., the rocket roared to life. Within minutes, disaster struck. One of the two solar panels failed to deploy, crippling power and control. Komarov fought to stabilize the tumbling ship, burning precious fuel as ground control scrambled to save him. The planned launch of Soyuz 2 was canceled immediately. For 18 orbits, Komarov battled the failing spacecraft. His calm voice masked the chaos. Conditions are poor. Eventually, Mission Control ordered an emergency return. The capsule entered Earth's atmosphere engulfed in fire. The heat shield held, but the parachutes did not. The main chute failed to open, and the backup tangled with it. There would be no slowing down. Soviet listening posts recorded Komarov's final words filled with rage and despair as he cursed the officials who had sent him to his death. At 7:24 a.m., Soyuz 1 slammed into the steppe near Orenburg at over 250 mm, flattening on impact and erupting into flames. His remains fused with the wreckage, unrecognizable, beyond recovery. Komarov became the first human to die during spaceflight. The Soviet Union hid the truth, but among his fellow cosmonauts, outrage spread. Gagarin and others demanded accountability for a tragedy caused not by space itself, but by politics and pride. Soyuz flights were grounded for 18 months, and hundreds of flaws were corrected, the same ones Komarov had warned about. His sacrifice forced a reckoning within the Soviet space program. Vladimir Komarov didn't die because space is dangerous. He died because politics made it deadly. His final flight remains a haunting reminder of courage, friendship, and the deadly price of ambition.
Many questions and very few answers. But today is a day of mourning as the fallen soldiers make their final journey home.
It was a dark night over Afghanistan on April 17, 2002. A group of Canadian soldiers from Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry were in the middle of a nighttime training exercise, something they had done countless times before. They were firing at targets, practicing their maneuvers, preparing for the real battles ahead. Far above them, 2 U.S. Air National Guard pilots, Major William Umbach and his wingman, Major Harry Schmidt, were returning from a long, exhausting 10-hour patrol in their F-16s. Fatigue was setting in, and the silence of the cockpit was broken only by radio chatter and the hum of the engines. Then, suddenly, they saw flashes of light from the ground. To the pilots, it looked like surface-to-air fire, the kind of attack every flyer dreads. But what they didn't know was that those flashes weren't enemy weapons. They were Canadian soldiers conducting a live fire exercise with anti-tank guns and machine fire. Schmidt radioed for permission to engage, his voice tight with urgency. "I'm rolling in self-defense," he said, convinced they were under attack. His flight lead warned him to wait. "Let's make sure it's not friendly." But the tension in the air was suffocating. Seconds later, Schmidt released a 500-pound laser-guided bomb toward the supposed threat below. 22 seconds later, the explosion lit up the desert night like a second sunrise. The blast tore through the Canadian camp. 4 soldiers were killed instantly. 8 more were gravely wounded. When the dust settled, the horrifying truth came out: the men on the ground weren't Taliban fighters. They were allies, friends, the first Canadians to die in combat since the Korean War, and it was at the hands of their own side. In the aftermath, chaos erupted between military commands. Both Canada and the U.S. launched investigations. The findings were damning. The Canadian board concluded that their troops had done everything by the book, their training had been approved, their procedures sound. The tragedy, they said, came from above. The U.S. pilots had broken protocol, ignored orders to hold fire, and acted on flawed assumptions. But the Canadians also pointed to failures in communication, planning, and coordination between Allied forces. Major Harry Schmidt later gave a long, emotional apology. But for the families back home, those words brought little comfort. Mothers like Claire Léger, Agatha Dyer, and Charlotte Smith, each later chosen as Silver Cross mothers to represent the grief of all military families, would stand in silence on Remembrance Day, holding the memories of sons who died not in enemy hands, but in the hands of their friends. Years later, the American pilots faced military discipline. Major Umbach was allowed to retire quietly, reprimanded for leadership failures. Major Schmidt, however, was found guilty of dereliction of duty. He was fined, officially reprimanded, and condemned by his superior, who wrote, "You acted shamefully, you blatantly ignored the direction to hold fire." The words burned, but they couldn't undo what had been done.
The people of the Soviet Union were keen to welcome them back to Earth. But when their capsule touched down and the recovery team knocked on the door, they received no response.
It was June 6, 1971. A quiet night on the Kazakh steppe, but at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, history was preparing to roar to life once again. 3 Soviet cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, climbed into their Soyuz 11 capsule, unaware they were stepping into one of the most haunting tragedies in the history of space exploration. They were national heroes, chosen to represent the Soviet Union's new frontier, Salyut 1, the world's first space station. Their mission to live and work in orbit for 3 weeks was meant to prove that humans could survive long-term in space. The launch was flawless. Within a day, Soyuz 11 docked with Salyut 1, and for the first time in history, humans entered a functioning space station. For 22 days, the crew lived hundreds of kilometers above Earth, conducting experiments, broadcasting to millions, and setting endurance records. But small problems began to surface: smoke in the air filters, a brief electrical fire, and communication static. Still, they stayed calm and completed the mission. By June 29th, their work was done. They sealed the station, undocked, and began their return to Earth. Every system checked out, their voices steady and confident. Then, suddenly, radio silence. The capsule re-entered the atmosphere smoothly. Parachutes deployed, and at 2:17 a.m. on June 30th, it landed softly in Kazakhstan. Ground crews rushed to greet the heroes, but when they opened the hatch, their smiles vanished. All 3 cosmonauts sat motionless, their faces blue, blood at their noses and ears. There was no fire, no crash, just silence. They had suffocated in space. The investigation uncovered a horrifying truth. A tiny pressure valve, damaged during separation, had opened too early, venting the cabin into the vacuum of space. Within 15 seconds, the pressure dropped to 0. Viktor Patsayev, seated closest to the valve, had tried to close it, but he never stood a chance. In under a minute, all 3 were dead. Doctors later discovered that their blood had foamed and capillaries had burst, the unmistakable signs of rapid decompression. They had become the only humans to die in space itself. The Soviet Union declared the mission a success and honored them with heroes' funerals in Red Square, their ashes laid beside Yuri Gagarin. The truth of their deaths was hidden for years, while engineers quietly redesigned the Soyuz to carry only 2 cosmonauts, allowing for pressure suits during launch and landing. When rescuers first opened the capsule, one whispered, "Dobrovolsky is still warm." They tried to revive him, but the void had already claimed them all. Even today, craters on the moon bear their names: Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev, 3 men who reached higher than anyone before them and proved a chilling truth. In space, it's not the vastness that kills you, but the smallest, simplest things.
3 13-year-old girls in costume carrying bags of candy were killed while trick-or-treating Friday evening in a hit-and-run crash in Southern California.
It was Halloween night in Santa Ana, California. The sidewalks glowed under porch lights, laughter echoed through the streets, and 3 teenage girls, twin sisters Lexi and Alexandra Perez, and their best friend Andrea Gonzalez, skipped from house to house, dressed in costumes, their candy bags filling fast. They were only a few blocks from home. The world felt safe, innocent, until it wasn't. At around 6:45 p.m., the girls reached the crosswalk near Fairhaven Elementary School, a place they'd walked countless times before. But in a single, horrifying instant, the magic of Halloween shattered. A black SUV came hurtling toward them out of the dark, moving fast, too fast. Tires screeched. There was a sickening thud. Candy spilled across the pavement. Then silence. Witnesses say the SUV didn't even stop. It just kept going, its headlights cutting through the night as the driver vanished into the distance. 2 of the girls died instantly. The third struggled to breathe as paramedics fought desperately to save her, but she, too, was gone within minutes. 3 young lives erased in the blink of an eye. People nearby dropped their candy bags and ran toward the scene. A father, trick-or-treating with his 8-year-old daughter, said he heard the crash, a sound so violent it froze him in place. When he reached the crosswalk, there was already a tarp covering 2 small bodies. Around them, hundreds of people still in costumes gathered in disbelief. Some cried, some prayed, others just stood in shock, clutching their children tighter. One firefighter called it the saddest thing I've seen in 20 years. Police arrived quickly, but the driver was gone. Only the SUV remained abandoned a few streets away, its front end crushed and splattered with evidence of what it had done. It didn't take long before detectives found their suspect. 2 days later, they arrested 31-year-old Jacqueline Ramon Bell, hiding out at a Motel 6 in Stanton, just miles from the crash site. When the truth came out, it was even more heartbreaking. Bell hadn't been alone that night. His own 2 children were in the car with him when he struck the girls. Instead of stopping, he panicked and fled, leaving them and the 3 dying teens behind. Police later discovered he'd been driving with a suspended license. His criminal record stretched back years, filled with probation violations. He was charged with vehicular manslaughter and felony hit and run, facing up to 17 years in prison. But for the victims' families, no sentence could ever be enough. The twins' mother, Cynthia Huerta, sobbed to reporters, "It's not fair. He's free, and I'm without my daughters. I can't find the words to describe this pain." Her home, once filled with laughter, was now a shrine of flowers, photos, and half-finished Halloween candy bags. As news of the tragedy spread, the city of Santa Ana fell silent. Residents built a makeshift memorial at the intersection. Balloons, candles, handwritten notes that read, "Fly high, angels." Strangers came by, night after night, some kneeling in prayer, others leaving candy buckets as if the girls might still come by for one last treat. That Halloween, the streets of Santa Ana went dark a little earlier than usual. Parents pulled their kids closer. The sound of laughter faded. And even years later, locals say they can't cross that street without thinking of the twins and their friend, 3 girls who just wanted to enjoy Halloween and never made it home.
April 14th, 1994. An American F-15 patrol over the mountains of Iraq picks up an unexpected radar signature.
It was April 14, 1994. 2 U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters flew low through the sky, carrying 26 people on a peacekeeping mission. On board were American soldiers, officers, aid workers, and Kurdish civilians. Their job was simple: to help protect refugees and keep the region safe after the Gulf War. Far above them, 2 U.S. Air Force F-15 fighter jets were patrolling the area. Their mission was to protect the skies from enemy aircraft. But that morning, something went terribly wrong. Due to a small technical error, the Blackhawks didn't appear as friendly on radar. When the F-15 pilots saw 2 helicopters flying below, they thought they were enemy aircraft, Iraqi Hinds, which were used by Saddam Hussein's forces. Without realizing the truth, one pilot fired a missile. Seconds later, the second jet followed. Both missiles hit their targets and the sky lit up with fire. The 2 Blackhawks exploded in midair, crashing into the mountains below. Every single person on board was killed instantly. It was only later that the horrifying truth came out. The F-15s had destroyed their own side's helicopters. At first, the U.S. military claimed it was an accident caused by confusion during a mission, but investigations revealed a series of shocking failures. Communication between the Army and Air Force had completely broken down. The AWACS plane that was supposed to track all aircraft in the area never warned the F-15s. The identification system that should have labeled the helicopters as friendly wasn't working properly. Every layer of safety that should have prevented the tragedy failed. The pilots, Captain Eric Wixon and Lieutenant Colonel Randy May, said they truly believed they were attacking enemy aircraft. From a distance, the Blackhawks looked like Hinds, and no one corrected them. On the radio, after the missiles hit, one of them said, "Stick a fork in them. They're done," not realizing those were their own people. It was a moment of deadly misunderstanding that no one could take back. When the news reached Washington, the reaction was immediate. President Bill Clinton personally apologized to the leaders of allied nations, including Britain and Turkey, who had lost their citizens in the attack. Families of the victims were devastated and demanded justice. They wanted someone to be held responsible for the deaths of their loved ones. But accountability never truly came. Only one person, a member of the AWACS crew, was court-martialed, and he was found not guilty. The F-15 pilots and others involved were reprimanded, but none faced prison time. In the end, the U.S. military admitted to a long list of failures and promised to make changes. New safety procedures were created, better communication systems were put in place, and the rules for identifying aircraft were tightened. But for the 26 people who died that day, and for their families, those changes came too late. Among the dead were 15 Americans, 3 Turkish officers, 2 British officers, 1 French officer, and several Kurdish civilians. Each one had been part of a mission meant to save lives. Instead, their lives were lost to a tragic mistake made by their own side.
Most of today's testimony came from Jimmy Bates, a close friend of the O'Brien family. Bates said that before Halloween, O'Brien asked if he could bring his children over to trick-or-treat with the Bates children on Halloween night.
Halloween night, 1974. The streets of Deer Park, Texas were alive with the sound of children's laughter. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed, costumes rustled, and candy filled eager hands. Among the trick-or-treaters was 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, holding his father's hand. He had no idea this night would be his last. Ronald Clark O'Brien seemed like the perfect father. But behind the polite smile was a man drowning in over $100,000 of debt. In his desperation, he hatched a plan that would horrify an entire nation and earn him a chilling nickname, the Candy Man. That Halloween, Ronald took Timothy, his daughter Elizabeth, and some neighborhood kids trick-or-treating. At one house where no one answered, he lingered behind and later returned holding 5 extra long pixie sticks. They were handing these out, he said casually, giving one to each child including Timothy. Later that night, back home, Timothy asked for 1 piece of candy before bed. Ronald suggested the pixie sticks. Timothy said it tasted bitter, and his father gave him Kool-Aid to wash it down. Minutes later, the boy screamed in pain, began vomiting, and collapsed. He was dead before reaching the hospital. Investigators soon discovered the pixie sticks had been laced with potassium cyanide, enough to kill 2 adults. 4 more poisoned pixie sticks were recovered, one nearly eaten by another child who couldn't open the stapled end. At first, police feared a random killer had tainted Halloween candy, but Ronald's story began to unravel. He claimed a mysterious man had handed him the pixie sticks through a cracked door, but the supposed homeowner had been at work all night. Detectives soon uncovered Ronald's financial troubles and found that he had taken out multiple life insurance policies on his children, totaling about $100,000. The day after Timothy's death, he even called the insurance company to ask when he could collect. Police also discovered he'd recently asked about buying cyanide from a chemical supply store. On November 5, 1974, he was arrested and charged with his son's murder and the attempted murder of 4 other children. The trial shocked the nation. Witnesses described Ronald's morbid curiosity about poison and how he'd spoken of using the insurance money to go on vacation even during his son's funeral. His wife divorced him, and the jury convicted him to death. It was November 15th, 1967 morning over the Mojave Desert. On the runway at Edwards Air Force Base, a sleek black aircraft sat beneath the wing of a massive B-52 bomber. Inside its cockpit was 37-year-old Major Michael J. Adams, a test pilot, an engineer, and a man who had spent his life chasing the edge of the impossible. Adams wasn't just another pilot. He was one of the best veterans of the U.S. Air Force, a man being quietly considered for NASA's astronaut corps. He had already flown 6 missions in the legendary X-15, a rocket-powered aircraft built to explore where the atmosphere ended and space began. This would be his 7th flight, 365 OS 97, a test meant to reach an altitude of 250,000 feet, more than 47 miles above the Earth. It was a routine mission by X-15 standards, but everyone in the program knew routine was a dangerous word. At exactly 10:30 a.m., the B-52 released the X-15 from 45,000 feet over Delamar Dry Lake. The moment Adams hit the ignition, the rocket came alive. 57,000 pounds of thrust blasted him forward, pressing him into his seat as the aircraft roared upward. In seconds, the desert fell away beneath him. The sky darkened from blue to indigo to black. He was riding a controlled explosion into space. Everything looked perfect. The X-15 climbed steeply and cleanly through the atmosphere. Instruments stable, engine burning bright. Within minutes, Adams reached an altitude of 266,000 feet, officially entering space. He became one of the few humans in history to see Earth curve below him, glowing blue and white beneath an infinite black sky. But up there, above the breathable world, something subtle began to go wrong. The X-15 started to drift. In the near vacuum of space, there was no wind resistance, no feeling in the controls to warn him. The aircraft was quietly twisting off course, and Adams didn't realize it yet. The reaction control system wasn't responding properly. Down on the ground, engineers at Edwards tracked his flight path, unaware of the silent instability building above. Adams began his descent, but the yaw became worse. The X-15 started to spin. Not a gentle rotation, but a violent, tumbling motion, the kind that even the most skilled pilot can't easily stop. He fought the controls, tried to steady her. His voice came over the radio, strained but calm. "I'm in a spin." Mission Control couldn't see his true orientation. The data was patchy, the plasma around the aircraft blocking signals. They told him to stay steady, to work through it. But there was no spin recovery procedure for a rocket plane moving faster than Mach 5. Adams was now falling back into the atmosphere, sideways, spinning end over end at over 3,000 miles per hour. As he re-entered thicker air, aerodynamic forces slammed into the X-15. The aircraft's angle of attack was so extreme that it was flying almost broadside into the air. The G-forces mounted 5 Gs, 10 Gs, 15 Gs. Adams struggled to correct, but at that speed, even the smallest movement could send the craft into chaos. The black horizon spun wildly in front of him. At 65,000 feet, traveling at Mach 3.9, the X-15 reached its breaking point. The stress on the airframe was beyond anything human or machine could bear. The aircraft began to tear itself apart, wings shearing off, fragments scattering across the desert sky. In his final moments, Adams likely lost consciousness. Seconds later, the X-15 disintegrated in a flash of fire and metal. Debris rained down over the barren desert near Johannesburg, California. The main wreckage carved a deep crater into the sand. Rescue teams rushed to the site and found Adams's body still strapped into his seat. The ejection system had never fired. It was over in less than 11 minutes. They found that he had done everything right, every move logical, every effort heroic. But at those speeds, at those altitudes, a single misreading could turn triumph into tragedy. The loss of Michael Adams sent shockwaves through the spaceflight community. NASA and the Air Force convened an accident board, searching for answers in the twisted wreckage. His cockpit camera was found smashed, but after days of searching, engineers recovered the tiny film cartridge that revealed his final seconds, a man calmly working the controls until the end. The board made crucial changes after his death: new ground-based attitude indicators, better pilot training for disorientation, and tighter safeguards on flight control systems. From that day forward, mission controllers could see exactly what their pilots saw: pitch, roll, yaw, heading in real time. It was a lesson written in blood and sky. Major Michael J. Adams was posthumously awarded astronaut wings, making him the first person to earn them by dying in space. His name is carved into the Space Mirror Memorial in Florida, alongside others who gave their lives pushing the boundaries of human flight.